I woke up beside a vampire nurse. She giggled softly and said you held my hand all night. Liam's eyes fluttered open, the soft hum of machines filling the quiet hospital room. He blinked a few times, trying to focus. His head felt heavy and a dull ache throbbed in the back of his skull. He tried to lift his hand to rub his face, but something stopped him. His hand was held. Looking down, his eyes widened in surprise. A soft, pale hand was wrapped around his own, delicate fingers gripping his like a lifeline. His gaze traveled up the hand, following the arm, and stopped when he saw her face. She was sitting next to him, watching him with quiet amusement, a soft smile playing at her lips. Her eyes were glowing faintly, a strange but comforting shade of red, and there was a mischievous glint in them. She had long black hair, cascading down her back like a dark waterfall, and she wore a sleek, futuristic nurse's uniform that seemed to blend practicality with a strange elegance. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "I see you've finally woken up." Liam's heart skipped a beat as he tried to make sense of the situation. Where was he? Why was he in a hospital? And most importantly, who was this woman holding his hand? His mind raced, trying to pull together fragmented memories. He had been on a mission, something dangerous. A firefight, a crash, but the details were hazy, like trying to recall a dream that had already begun to slip away. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The woman's smile widened, showing a glimpse of sharp, white fangs, but it didn't feel threatening. There was something oddly comforting about her presence, something that eased the panic creeping into Liam's chest. "I'm Raven," she said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Your nurse. I've been taking care of you while you've been out." Liam furrowed his brow. A nurse, but she didn't look like any nurse he'd ever seen. There was something about her, something otherworldly. He could feel it, but he couldn't quite place it. The way her eyes shimmered. The faint, almost imperceptible hint of something ancient in the air around her. "Wait," he said, his mind catching up. "Did you say nurse, but you're a vampire?" She finished for him, her voice amused. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe me." Liam blinked, still trying to process what she was saying. A vampire, that wasn't possible. Vampires were myths, stories from old books. No one had ever actually seen one. Yet here she was, sitting beside him, holding his hand and looking at him like she knew exactly what he was thinking. He glanced around the room, taking in his surroundings. The walls were smooth and glowing, bathed in soft blue light. It looked like something straight out of a sci-fi film, not a typical hospital. The sterile smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint scent of lavender, which somehow seemed to calm him. It was too clean, too perfect. "What happened to me?" Liam asked, focusing back on Raven. "How did I end up here?" She tilted her head slightly, her gaze softening. "You were injured during a mission. You came in unconscious, barely hanging on. I've been working with the doctors to help stabilize you." Liam tried to remember what had happened, but his mind was a fog. He couldn't remember the details of the mission. He remembered flashes, blasts, fire, screams, but it was all fragmented. He felt like he was missing something important, something that had happened just before the crash. "Why can't I remember anything?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Raven's eyes softened with sympathy. "Your mind was damaged. It's not unusual after such trauma. Your memories may take time to return." Liam clenched his jaw, frustrated with the situation. He didn't like being in the dark. He didn't like not knowing what had happened, what he had done. But there was something else bugging him. He looked down at their hands again, his fingers still tightly entwined with hers. A strange warmth radiated from her touch, like a comforting fire. He wanted to pull his hand away, but somehow he didn't. Instead, he found himself holding on, as if his body didn't want to let go. Raven noticed his gaze and chuckled softly. "Don't worry, I'm not going to bite you, unless you ask nicely." Liam felt a shiver run down his spine, half from her teasing tone, half from the realization of what she really was. She was a vampire, and her very existence defied everything he knew about the universe. Yet here she was, sitting beside him, acting almost normal. "You're really a vampire," he said, half to himself, still trying to comprehend it. "Indeed," she replied with a smile, her fangs barely visible. "I know it's a lot to take in, but you're safe here." Safe? How could he be safe with a vampire? The stories he had heard, the old myths, vampires were dangerous, bloodthirsty creatures. They didn't sit by bedsides, holding hands with their patients. But there was something about Raven that didn't feel dangerous. Despite the fangs, despite the otherworldly glow in her eyes, there was an air of gentleness about her. A quiet strength that calmed him, made him feel protected. Liam took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. How long was I out? About a day and a half, Raven answered. You were in pretty bad shape when they brought you in, but don't worry, you're healing fast. You've got a good set of lungs, even if your memory's a little scrambled. Liam smiled weakly, appreciating her attempt at humor. Despite the bizarre situation, he found himself relaxing a little, drawn into her calm presence. Do you always hold your patients' hands? He asked, trying to lighten the mood. Raven's grin turned mischievous. Not always, but you seem to be holding mine when I found you. And well, I didn't mind. Liam blinked, his cheeks flushing slightly. I held your hand, she nodded. You did all night. His heart skipped a beat. He couldn't remember doing it, but the thought of holding a vampire's hand, someone who, according to every myth he had ever heard, should be dangerous, felt surreal. But there was something else in the way she said it, something warm. It didn't feel wrong. I'm sorry, Liam said, feeling a bit awkward. I didn't mean to. No need to apologize, Raven interrupted, her voice gentle. It was comforting for both of us, I think. Liam nodded slowly, unsure of what else to say. There were too many questions swirling in his mind, too many unknowns. But one thing was certain. He didn't feel afraid of Raven. There was something in her presence that made him feel at ease, despite the fact that she was a vampire and he was just a human. For the first time since he woke up, Liam allowed himself to relax a little, to let go of some of the tension in his body. As if sensing his shift in mood, Raven smiled again, a little softer this time. You've been through a lot, Liam, but you're not alone. Liam met her gaze, a sense of gratitude filling him. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel entirely alone. And maybe that was all he needed, someone, even if they were a vampire, to be there for him. Thank you, he said quietly. Raven's smile deepened, and she squeezed his hand gently. You're welcome. Now get some rest. You're going to need your strength for what's coming next. Liam nodded, still confused, still uncertain about everything. But as he lay back down, feeling the cool sheets beneath him, he closed his eyes, trusting Raven's words. Whatever came next, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. And that thought was enough to give him a sense of peace he hadn't expected. The soft hum of the medical machines surrounded Liam as he lay in the bed, trying to make sense of the situation. The room was quiet now, except for the occasional beeping and the whir of the air ventilation system. Raven had left to attend to other patients, but Liam couldn't shake the strange feeling that lingered after their conversation. His mind kept returning to the odd comfort he had felt when he held her hand. He shook his head, trying to clear the thoughts. Vampires weren't real, at least that's what he had always believed. But here she was, sitting beside him, claiming to be one. And not just any vampire, but a nurse, a healer. The more he thought about it, the more his mind raced. Raven had been kind to him, calm, and even gentle. She didn't seem dangerous, not like the stories he had heard as a child. But there was something about her that seemed different, more ancient, like she carried the weight of centuries in her gaze. Liam rolled over in the bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was modern, sleek, with glowing panels on the walls and soft blue lighting that gave everything an almost ethereal glow. Everything was too perfect, too clean. It didn't feel like a hospital, more like something out of a futuristic movie. He closed his eyes, trying to focus on the memories that were slipping away from him. The last thing he remembered was being in the middle of a mission. There had been explosions, gunfire, and then nothing, a black hole in his mind. Raven had mentioned that his memories might return over time, but he couldn't wait that long. He needed to know what happened. The door to the room clicked open, and Raven stepped inside. Her presence was calming, like a soft breeze that made everything feel just a little less heavy. She had a tray of food in her hands, a steaming cup of something that smelled faintly of herbs. I thought you might be hungry, she said, her voice gentle as she approached the bed. Liam sat up, surprised. You brought me food, but I'm not exactly your average patient. I don't know what kind of food you'd have for me. Raven smiled, her fangs flashing for a brief moment. I know what you mean. But I've seen enough humans to know what you can eat. She placed the tray on the bedside table. It's just some soup, nothing fancy. You should be able to digest it just fine. Liam eyed the soup curiously. It looked like a simple broth, nothing too complicated. It smelled good, though, and his stomach rumbled in response. Thanks, he said, grabbing the spoon. I didn't realize I'd be this hungry. Your body's been through a lot, Raven said, sitting down in the chair beside the bed. It's only natural to feel weak after everything you've been through. Liam nodded, blowing on the soup to cool it down. The warmth of the meal felt soothing, and he took a few slow sips. Raven watched him with an intensity that made him feel a little self-conscious, but he didn't mind it. Her gaze wasn't judgmental, just thoughtful. "So, tell me more about yourself," Liam said between spoonfuls, hoping to steer the conversation away from his own confusion. "You said you were a nurse, but I'm guessing there's more to your story than that. Vampires don't usually do this kind of work." Raven tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words carefully. "I wasn't always a nurse," she said slowly. "In fact, I wasn't always even human." Liam stopped mid-bite, his spoon hovering near his mouth. "What do you mean by that?" Raven gave him a wry smile, her eyes reflecting a glint of something far older than her years. "I was born centuries ago in a different world on a different planet. My people were part of a race of warriors. We were trained to fight, to conquer. Vampires, or the Vilhara as we call ourselves, were feared and revered. We weren't healers, we were hunters." Liam blinked, struggling to process her words. A race of warriors, vampires as warriors. It was hard to believe, but there was something in her tone that made it sound real. "So, what happened?" Liam asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "How did you end up here helping people like me?" Raven's expression softened, and she looked down at her hands, almost as if she were lost in a memory. "War changes people," she said quietly. "When I was younger, I didn't think about the lives we were taking. It was all about victory, about honor. But as I grew older, I started to see things differently. I began to question the things I had been taught. Eventually, I couldn't stand the violence anymore. I wanted to change, to find a new purpose." She paused, her eyes meeting Liam's. "I joined the medical corps, became a healer instead of a warrior. But the past never really lets you go. No matter how much you change, you always carry a piece of it with you." Liam was silent for a moment, taking in her words. The weight of them sank in, and he realized that Raven's decision to leave behind her violent past was something extraordinary. Most people, whether human or alien, couldn't just change overnight. But she had, and that spoke volumes about her character. "I can't imagine what that must have been like," Liam said, his voice low, "to leave everything you knew behind." "It wasn't easy," Raven admitted. "But I found something I could believe in, saving lives instead of taking them. It's been my purpose for the last century. And now here I am." Liam set the spoon down, his appetite suddenly gone. He looked at her, his mind still processing everything she had said. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but there was a part of him that felt connected to her. Maybe it was because she, too, had been through a transformation, just like him. He had no memory of the person he had been before the mission, but perhaps, in a way, he was starting a new chapter in his life as well. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you," Liam said softly. "I mean, I always thought vampires were just stories, but you're real, and you're nothing like what I imagined." Raven chuckled, the sound light and playful. "Most people think that way. They see us as monsters, creatures of the night, always out for blood. But we're not all like that. We have our own struggles, our own choices to make, just like anyone else." Liam nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. The world wasn't as simple as it seemed, and Raven, despite being a vampire, was proof of that. She had changed her destiny, chosen a different path, and now she was saving lives instead of ending them. "I don't know what's going to happen to me," Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know who I was before this. I feel like I've lost so much." "You haven't lost anything," Raven said, her voice firm but kind. "You're still here, and that means you have a chance to choose what comes next. You're not defined by your past, not by the mission, not by the person you were before. You're you, and that's enough." Her words gave him a strange sense of comfort, but also a new kind of pressure. What was he supposed to do with this second chance? What was he meant to become now that he had this new opportunity? Before he could respond, a soft beep interrupted their conversation. Raven glanced at the nearby monitor, her expression shifting slightly. "It looks like your vitals are stable," she said, standing up from her chair. "You're recovering faster than we expected. Soon you'll be able to get out of here." Liam raised an eyebrow. "Out of here? You mean I'm not stuck in this room forever?" Raven smiled. "Not forever, just until you're strong enough to leave. I've seen a lot of soldiers like you, Liam. They always think their battles are over, but they're not. They just change shape. And the hardest part is always figuring out who you are once you've left the battlefield." Liam nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He wasn't sure what was ahead for him, but one thing was clear. Raven had helped him in more ways than one. She had given him more than just care for his wounds. She had given him a new perspective. And for the first time since waking up, he felt a small spark of hope. As Raven left the room, Liam leaned back against the pillows, lost in thought. The journey ahead was uncertain, but with Raven's help, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could start finding his way again. Liam lay back in the bed, staring at the ceiling. The quiet of the room was almost peaceful, but his thoughts were a constant whirlwind. Every time he tried to focus, his mind wandered back to the one question that seemed to haunt him: what had happened during his mission? The memories were still like fog, just out of reach. All he could recall were flashes of noise, explosions, and the overwhelming feeling of something going wrong. The blank space in his mind made him uneasy, like there was something important missing. Raven had returned to her duties, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He wasn't sure if he should be relieved or unsettled by her absence. She had become a strange comfort to him in such a short time. He had always been skeptical about vampires, about their legends and stories. But Raven was real, and she had done something no one else had ever done for him. She had made him feel seen, not as a soldier or a patient, but as a person. His eyes drifted to the tray that still sat beside the bed, a half-finished bowl of soup on it. He hadn't been very hungry earlier, his thoughts too heavy to focus on food. But now he felt a gnawing hunger, not just for food, but for answers. He needed to understand what had happened, what his role was in all of this. What had Raven meant when she said he wasn't just a soldier, that there was more to him than he could remember? As he tried to push the thoughts from his mind, the door to his room opened softly. Raven stepped inside, her dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders. She had a small device in her hand, something that looked like a futuristic tablet. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, her voice still calm, but there was an underlying warmth in it. Liam gave her a half-smile, sitting up straighter in bed. "Better, I guess. The headache's gone, but my mind is still all over the place." Raven nodded, stepping closer. "That's to be expected. Your body's healing quickly, but your mind needs more time to catch up. It's not easy recovering from trauma like this." Liam ran a hand through his hair, frustration rising again. "I don't even know what happened. One minute I was on a mission. The next I wake up here with no memory of what went wrong." She set the tablet down on the bedside table and sat beside him. "I've seen this before, Liam. It's not uncommon for people to lose their memories after intense trauma. The mind sometimes shuts things out for self-protection, but in time your memories may return." Liam looked at her, his gaze searching. "Do you really think that will happen? Will I ever get back who I was before this?" Raven met his eyes, her expression serious yet compassionate. "I can't promise that your memories will come back, not in the way you want. But I can promise you this: you're not defined by your past or by the person you think you were. You are who you choose to be, Liam." Liam thought about her words, the weight of them sinking into him. He had always been defined by his role as a soldier. That was all he had known. But now, with everything that had happened, he realized that maybe he had been clinging to an identity that wasn't really him. Maybe it was time to let go of that. But it wasn't easy, not when everything he had known was a blur. "So what happens now?" Liam asked, his voice softer. "What am I supposed to do?" Raven smiled gently, a small spark of hope in her eyes. "That's the beauty of it, Liam. You get to choose. There's a whole world out there waiting for you to figure out what comes next." Before Liam could respond, the tablet on the table beeped softly, drawing Raven's attention. She glanced at it, her expression changing slightly, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "What is it?" Liam asked, noticing the shift in her demeanor. Raven's fingers hovered over the screen, her eyes scanning the information. "It's a report from the mission you were on." Liam's heart skipped a beat. "From my mission?" Raven nodded, her gaze still focused on the screen. "The data was collected by the team who brought you in. They're trying to understand what went wrong, why you were injured." "What does it say?" Liam asked, leaning forward. Raven hesitated for a moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. "It seems there was a malfunction in the operation, an ambush, something unexpected." But she paused, looking up at Liam with a concerned expression. "There's more to it, something different about what happened to you." Liam's mind raced. "What do you mean, what's different?" Raven took a deep breath. "Your injury, it wasn't just physical. There was something else involved, something that wasn't in the mission parameters. I don't know how, but it looks like you were exposed to something. Experimental." Liam felt his chest tighten. "Experimental? What kind of experiment?" I don't have all the details, Raven replied, setting the tablet down. But I think it has to do with the Centauri. Liam's confusion deepened. The Centauri? Who are they? Raven's eyes darkened slightly at the mention of the name. They're an alien race, powerful, dangerous. They have a technology that can manipulate minds, control them, and it looks like they were involved in whatever happened to you during your mission. Liam shook his head, trying to process what Raven was telling him. But I don't remember anything about them. I don't remember anything about the mission. I know, Raven said softly, and that's the problem. It's possible that the Centauri tried to use you for something, to manipulate your mind in some way, and whatever they did, it has affected you. Liam's thoughts were swirling. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to understand the situation. So I've been experimented on, they used me. Raven's face softened with sympathy. I don't know for sure. But there's a chance that whatever happened to you during that mission might have changed something inside of you. Something different. Liam sat back in the bed, his mind racing. He didn't know what to think. Had he been a pawn in some kind of experiment? Had he been used without even knowing it? The idea made his stomach churn. The thought that someone had taken control of him made him into something he was. It was too much to bear. What am I supposed to do now? Liam whispered, his voice strained. Raven placed a hand on his shoulder, offering comfort. You're not alone in this, Liam. We'll figure it out together. And whatever they've done to you, we'll make sure it doesn't define who you become. Liam looked into her eyes, seeing the determination in her gaze. Despite everything he had learned, despite the confusion and fear that filled him, there was one thing he was sure of: Raven would be there, helping him through it all. But there was still so much they didn't understand. So many questions. He needed answers. And the only way to get them was to face the truth of what had happened during that mission. He stood up slowly, his legs still shaky from the long recovery, but his resolve growing stronger with each passing moment. He had to find out what the Centauri had done to him and what they wanted from him. I'm going to find out what happened, Liam said, his voice firm. I need to know the truth. Raven stood beside him, her presence a comforting support. And I'll be with you every step of the way. Liam nodded, taking a deep breath. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Raven by his side, he felt like he could face whatever came next. He didn't know what he was meant to become or what the future held. But he was no longer afraid to find out. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next as Liam struggled to piece together the fractured memories of his mission. Raven remained by his side, helping him in ways he couldn't have imagined before. She was patient, always calm, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm of confusion that swirled inside his mind. But no matter how much time passed, the feeling of not knowing, of being lost in his own thoughts, never went away. Liam had asked Raven to help him track down the details of his mission. It wasn't enough to simply recover from his physical injuries. He needed to understand what had happened, who had done it to him, and why. Raven had agreed to assist, but there were risks involved. The Centauri were dangerous, and anything related to them could put them both in grave danger. Still, Liam couldn't shake the need to find answers. One evening after dinner, Raven led him through a quiet corridor of the facility. It was far from the sterile, high-tech environment he had first woken up in. The walls here were old, made of stone, with the faint scent of age in the air. It felt like an underground facility, hidden from the rest of the world. We're almost there, Raven said, glancing over her shoulder at him. This is the secure area. The information we need should be in one of these rooms. Liam nodded, his heart racing slightly. His mind kept telling him that he shouldn't be getting involved in something so dangerous, but his gut told him otherwise. The answers he needed were here, and he wasn't going to stop until he had them. Raven stopped in front of a heavy metal door and typed in a security code. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a small room filled with monitors and various medical equipment. At the center of the room was a large table, and on it, a series of files stacked neatly, as if waiting for someone to review them. Raven walked over to the table, her movements steady and deliberate, and gestured for Liam to join her. These are the mission reports, she said, flipping through the top file. The ones from the operation you were part of. Liam stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment. His mind was a jumble of questions, and now, for the first time, he was about to see the truth. Raven pulled out several files and spread them across the table. The mission you were assigned to, Raven began, was meant to infiltrate a Centauri base. They had a hidden outpost, and your team was tasked with gathering intelligence on their operations. But something went wrong. There's no mention of why, but it seems your squad was ambushed. Liam stared at the documents, trying to absorb the words, but it didn't make sense. His memory was still patchy, and the words on the page felt foreign. He couldn't remember the faces of the people he had worked with, the details of the mission. He only remembered the chaos, the panic, the fear. "You were hurt during the ambush," Raven continued, her voice steady. "A hit to the head, a gunshot wound." But that wasn't the worst part. Liam's stomach tightened. "What was the worst part?" Raven looked up at him, her eyes serious. "It seems you were exposed to a Scifi mind-control device. They've been experimenting with it for years, trying to manipulate thoughts, control actions. From the looks of these reports, they used it on you, but it's more complicated than that." Liam leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "Complicated how?" Raven hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. "The Scifi are trying to create hybrids, beings with both human and Scifi DNA. They want to combine human resilience with their own advanced mental capabilities. Your injury wasn't just a random hit. You were targeted. They injected you with something that altered your DNA." Liam blinked, trying to process the information. He had always thought of himself as a soldier, just a man doing his job. But now it seemed that the mission had been a lot more than he could have ever imagined. "You're saying they injected me with something to change my DNA?" Liam asked, his voice shaky. Raven nodded. "Yes, and it's possible that the changes are already starting to show. The mind control, the strength you've been feeling, it's all connected. You're not just recovering from physical wounds. Your body is undergoing something else entirely." Liam ran a hand through his hair, feeling overwhelmed. He had always known that the universe was vast, filled with unknowns. But this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was part of something much bigger, much more dangerous. "What does this mean for me?" he asked, his voice low. "What if I can't control what's happening to me?" Raven sighed, her face softening with sympathy. "That's the part we don't know yet. These changes are still unfolding, but it's important that you stay calm and focus on what you can control. If you don't, the Scifi could use these changes to their advantage." Liam's mind raced. The Scifi could control him. They had already tried. How far would they go to use him as a weapon? Would they come after him again? And if they did, would he be strong enough to stop them? "We need to get ahead of this," Raven said, snapping Liam out of his thoughts. "We need to find out exactly what they did to you. If there's any way to reverse the changes, or at least control them, we have to figure it out. Otherwise, you'll be a target, and not just for the Scifi." Liam looked at her, a sense of urgency growing inside him. He had no idea how he would find the answers, but he couldn't wait. He couldn't let the Scifi turn him into one of their experiments. "Where do we start?" he asked, his voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at him. Raven stood up, walking to one of the nearby monitors. She tapped a few buttons, bringing up a map of the Scifi's known locations. "We start by going to the source, the Scifi base where they performed the experiments. It's not far from here, and we can find more information there." Liam's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what they would find when they got there, but one thing was certain: he couldn't go back to the life he had before. The Scifi had changed him, and he needed to understand exactly how. Raven turned to face him. "Are you ready for this?" Liam nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he couldn't back down now. The only way forward was through the unknown. "Let's do it," he said, his voice firm. Together, they left the room, walking down the long corridor toward the exit. The facility felt quieter now, almost like a place that was waiting for something to happen. Liam's heart pounded in his chest as they made their way toward the transport vehicle that would take them to the Scifi base. They had a mission of their own now. The answers they needed were out there, and no matter what it took, Liam was determined to find them. The truth was waiting, and he wouldn't stop until he knew exactly what had happened to him and what he had become. Liam sat in the transport vehicle, staring out at the landscape as it sped by. The lights of the city were fading in the distance, and the open terrain stretched out before him. Raven was seated beside him, her expression unreadable as she adjusted the controls. She had been quiet for the last few minutes, focused on their destination. Liam's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but there was one question that dominated them all. What would they find at the Scifi base? He had no idea what to expect. Everything about the mission had been a blur. The ambush, the injury, the mind-control device. The more he learned, the more he realized how little he actually understood. He turned to Raven, who had been the only constant in this storm of confusion. "Do you really think we can find something at the base? Something that will help me understand what happened?" Raven glanced at him, her eyes dark but steady. "We have to, Liam. There's too much at stake. Whatever the Centauri did to you, we can't let it control you. We need to find out everything. The more we know, the better chance we have of stopping them." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a determination that Liam recognized. He had seen that same resolve in his own eyes when he had first decided to go on this mission. But now, it wasn't just about completing a job. It was about survival. As they approached their destination, the atmosphere in the vehicle grew tenser. Liam could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just a routine operation anymore. He wasn't just a soldier. He was someone who had been changed, and if he didn't act fast, the Centauri could make him into something even more dangerous. The transport vehicle slowed as they neared the outskirts of the Centauri base. From a distance, it looked like any other military installation: high fences, watchtowers, and a series of buildings clustered together. But there was something unsettling about it, something Liam couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the way the lights flickered in the distance, or the eerie stillness that hung in the air. It felt wrong. Raven parked the vehicle behind a row of trees, well out of sight of any security cameras. They would have to sneak in if they wanted to get close enough to find answers. The last thing they needed was to alert the Centauri to their presence. "We'll have to move quickly," Raven said, her voice low but urgent. "There are patrols around the perimeter." "We can't afford to get caught." Liam nodded, his heart pounding. The closer they got, the more he felt the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just about finding answers anymore. It was about taking control of his own future, about ensuring the Centauri couldn't use him again. Raven led the way, her movements swift and silent as she guided Liam through the dense trees that surrounded the base. Every step felt like a risk, but there was no turning back now. They had come this far, and there was no other option but to move forward. They reached the outer wall of the base, where a security checkpoint stood. Liam and Raven crouched low, staying out of sight of the guards who patrolled the area. Raven pulled out a small device from her belt and began fiddling with it, her fingers moving quickly as she worked. Liam couldn't help but watch her. Despite everything that had happened, there was something reassuring about her calm, focused demeanor. She knew what she was doing, and for the first time since his memory had gone dark, Liam felt like maybe he didn't have to do this alone. After a few tense moments, the device beeped softly, and the lock on the gate clicked open. Raven looked back at Liam, her eyes glinting with a silent promise. He gave her a brief nod, and they slipped through the gate into the base. The compound was much larger than Liam had expected. There were multiple buildings, all of them looking identical, as though they had been designed for a single purpose: secrecy. Raven moved with purpose, leading Liam through the shadows, staying hidden from any prying eyes. They approached one of the main buildings, a large structure near the center of the base. "This is it," Raven whispered. "This is where the experiments were conducted." Liam's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what he would find inside. The thought of what had happened to him, the way his body had been altered, filled him with a sense of unease. But he couldn't turn back now. Whatever the Centauri had done, he needed to understand it. Raven crouched beside the building, scanning the area for any signs of movement. When she was sure the coast was clear, she motioned for Liam to follow her. They moved quickly, staying low to the ground, and entered the building through a side door. Inside, the air was cold, and the faint hum of machinery echoed through the hallways. It was eerily quiet, and for a moment, Liam felt like they were intruding on something much larger than themselves. They moved through the hallways, passing rooms filled with strange equipment, their lights flickering on and off. Eventually, they came to a door marked Research and Development. Raven hesitated for a moment before she pushed it open. Inside, rows of computers lined the walls, and large glass tanks stood in the corners, each one containing a strange liquid. There were also files stacked on tables, just waiting to be uncovered. "This is where they conducted the experiments," Raven said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to find the data on you on what they did." Liam nodded and moved toward one of the computers. As he sat down at the console, he felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. What would he find? Would he discover the truth, or would it only make things worse? Raven pulled open a drawer and began searching through the papers. "They keep everything here," she said, her voice calm. "Every record, every experiment." Liam focused on the screen, typing in commands to search the system. His fingers moved quickly, the urgency of the situation pushing him forward. It didn't take long before a file appeared on the screen, labeled with his name. He opened it, his breath catching in his throat as he read the contents. The file detailed everything: the mission, the ambush, the injuries, and the Centaur's involvement. But it wasn't just about his mission. There were reports about the DNA alterations, the mind-control device, and something far more disturbing. They had been experimenting on him, yes, but they had also been studying his reactions, his physical abilities, and the way his body was changing. The file contained detailed notes about his heightened strength, his resistance to pain, and the strange, unnatural energy that had begun to build inside him. Liam felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The Centauri hadn't just tried to control him, they had turned him into something else. They had made him into a weapon. Raven must have noticed the change in his expression because she walked over and stood beside him. "What did you find?" Liam's voice was barely above a whisper. "They've turned me into something else, something they can control." Raven's expression softened and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll stop them, Liam. You're not their weapon. You're your own person." Liam nodded, but the weight of the truth still hung heavily on his shoulders. They had taken control of him, twisted him into something he was. But now that he knew the truth, he couldn't let them keep him that way. "We need to destroy this," Liam said, standing up. "All of it, the data, the experiments, everything." Raven looked at him, her eyes serious. "Are you sure?" Liam's gaze hardened. "I'm done being their experiment. It's time to take back control." Together, they began to destroy the computers and the files, erasing any trace of what the Centauri had done. They worked quickly, knowing that time was running out. Every minute they spent in the base was another minute they risked being caught. When they had finished, they made their way to the exit, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they stepped outside, Liam felt a strange sense of relief. They had destroyed the evidence, but the battle wasn't over. The Centauri were still out there, and they still had their sights set on him. But Liam wasn't the same person he had been when he first arrived at the base. He had learned the truth, and with that knowledge came a new strength, one he could use to fight back. As they returned to the transport vehicle, Liam turned to Raven. "What now?" Raven gave him a small, determined smile. "Now we take the fight to them." Liam nodded, a fire burning in his chest. He wasn't their weapon anymore. He was his own person, and the Centauri would learn that the hard way.